Someone hurts you. What do? Do you forgive them? Walk away? Or do you make sure they hurt too? Because there's something deeply satisfying about revenge. Someone humiliates you. You humiliate them. Someone cheats you. You expose them. Someone lies about you. You tell everyone what they're really like. Someone destroys your reputation. You destroy theirs. And today, you don't even have to confront them. You don't need to stand outside their house. You don't need to challenge them in the street. You don't even need to know where they are. You can sit in your bedroom, in your pajamas, with a cup of coffee, and destroy someone's reputation before breakfast. And here's the disturbing part. We have increasingly begun to call this justice. But is it? Or is it revenge simply wearing the clothes of justice? Two ancient religious traditions offer us two remarkably different responses to being wronged. One says essentially an eye for an eye. The other gives us the extraordinary instruction, turn the other cheek. These ideas have often been treated as opposites, and perhaps they are. But in a world where revenge has become easier than ever, we should ask which philosophy actually leaves us with the better life. Let's begin with the phrase everyone knows, an eye for an eye. The concept is ancient. The famous formulation appears in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And it's important to understand what it is actually doing. The principle was not simply, someone hurt you, so hurt them back. It was associated with proportional justice. The punishment should fit the offence, an eye for an eye, not two eyes, not an entire family, not everyone that the offender knows. The principle placed a limit on retaliation, and that distinction matters because the ancient world was perfectly capable of revenge becoming wildly disproportionate. Someone insults you, you kill them. Someone injures your brother, you attack his entire family. Someone steals from you, you destroy everything he owns. The idea of proportional punishment therefore represented an attempt to restrain revenge. It said, in effect, you don't get to make your response bigger than the original injury. And that's an important moral idea. But Christianity introduced another response, one that went considerably further. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is presented as saying, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, turn the other cheek." This wasn't merely a suggestion to be polite, it was a radical challenge to the instinct for retaliation. The message continues with the instruction to love one's enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Think about how difficult that is. Someone hurts you, your instincts say, make them pay. Christianity, at least in this teaching, says, don't. And this is where I want to make something very clear. This documentary isn't an argument against Judaism, and it isn't an argument against Christianity. Both traditions contain enormous internal complexity, and neither can be reduced to one quotation. The eye for an eye principle itself was historically concerned with limiting retaliation, and Christian traditions have never agreed on exactly how literally turn the other cheek should be applied. The point is that the two phrases represent two very different moral instincts. One says, justice should be proportional. The other says, break the cycle altogether. And I think that distinction has become remarkably relevant to modern life. Because we now live in an age where revenge can be performed publicly, and publicly is important. For most of human history, revenge was usually limited by geography. If you wanted revenge against someone who lived 50 miles away, you had to travel. If you wanted to ruin someone's reputation, you had to persuade people one at a time. If you wanted to embarrass somebody, there was a limit to how many people would witness it. The internet destroyed those limits. Now one person can make a claim about another person and potentially reach thousands or millions. And because we can hide behind keyboard and usernames, we can do things online that many of us would never have the courage to do face to face. Someone says something offensive, we don't simply disagree, we hunt through their history. Find old photographs, find old comments, find something embarrassing, and then we publish it. We don't necessarily want justice. Sometimes we want an audience for our revenge. And this is where the ancient principle of proportionality becomes useful. Imagine someone makes a stupid comment. You could challenge them, you could ignore them, you could tell them they're wrong, but instead you discover where they work, you publish their employer's details, you find their family members, you encourage strangers to contact them. Maybe the person loses their job, maybe their relationship collapses, maybe their children are bullied because of something their parents said. At that point, what happened? Did we achieve justice, or did we simply turn a small offence into a much larger one? And here's the irony. The internet has created a peculiar situation where the punishment can be far larger than the crime. A bad joke can become a permanent digital record. An argument can become a campaign. A personal disagreement can become a public trial. A moment of stupidity can become something someone carries for the rest of their life. And once thousands of strangers become involved, nobody seems to know where proportionality ends. Perhaps nowhere is this darker than so-called revenge porn, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. The phrase itself can be misleading because it makes the behavior sound like an unpleasant form of retaliation. It's much more serious than that. It can be a weapon. A former partner possesses something deeply private, and after a relationship ends badly, they release it. Not because the public has any legitimate interest in seeing it, but because the person wants to hurt somebody, to humiliate them, to punish them, to take control of something that once belonged to the relationship. The proliferation of this behavior has led governments to create laws specifically addressing the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. And that tells us something. Society has had to create new legal protections because technology gave revenge a capability that didn't previously exist on anything like the same scale. The technology changed, but the ancient impulse didn't. You hurt me, so I'll hurt you. And revenge doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like 1 star. We now have websites where we can rate restaurants, hotels, products, and businesses, and these systems can be extraordinarily useful. A genuine review can save someone from wasting money. It can warn us about dangerous products. It can reward excellent service. But there's a question we rarely ask when reading a furious review. What happened immediately before this person wrote it? Was the product genuinely terrible? Was the business dishonest? Or did the customer have an argument with an employee? Did someone refuse to give them something they weren't entitled to? Did they simply have an unreasonable expectation? Was the review written 5 minutes after an angry confrontation? We don't know. A rating looks objective because it has a number attached to it, but behind the number is a human being with emotions, biases, and sometimes an axe to grind. And increasingly we're doing the same thing to people, not just businesses, not just products, people. Consider what happens after a relationship ends. Once upon a time, the story was largely confined to friends and family. Now, we can tell everyone. And there are increasingly online spaces where people report on previous romantic partners. Sometimes those warnings are legitimate and necessary. There are genuinely dangerous people. There are abusive people. There are people who should be exposed and stopped. So we should never allow the argument against revenge to become an argument for silence about genuine abuse. But there is another category, the bitter breakup. The relationship that ended badly, the person who cheated, the person who lied, the person who simply didn't love us anymore. And perhaps the internet turns heartbreak into prosecution. We tell our side of the story, the other person doesn't get to respond. Then strangers judge them based on our version. And because we're emotionally involved, we may not even realize how much of what we're doing is driven by revenge. We tell ourselves, I'm warning people. But sometimes, beneath that explanation, there's another sentence. I want them to suffer the way I suffered. That is revenge. And here's why this problem is so difficult. Revenge feels good, at least initially. When someone hurts us, we experience injustice. We want the balance restored. We want the other person to understand what they did, and when we retaliate, we can experience a temporary sense that the scales have moved back toward equilibrium. But there's a trap. Because now the other person has become psychologically attached to us. We're thinking about them, talking about them, checking whether they've responded, waiting to see whether they've suffered, and suddenly they still control our attention. This is one of the great hidden costs of revenge. It keeps the people who hurt you living inside your head. Forgiveness can do something revenge cannot. It can end the relationship psychologically. It can say, what you did happened, it mattered, it hurt me, but you don't get to occupy the rest of my life. That isn't weakness. It can be an act of enormous strength. And this is where turn the other cheek is often misunderstood. Forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean allowing an abuser back into your life. It doesn't mean refusing to report a crime, and it doesn't mean abandoning justice. It also doesn't mean trusting somebody who has demonstrated that they are untrustworthy. It certainly doesn't mean that victims should remain silent. Sometimes the right response to wrongdoing is legal action. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's simply saying, "You will never do this to me again." But revenge is different. Justice asks, "What should happen?" Revenge asks, "How can I make them hurt?" Those questions may occasionally lead to the same action, but they come from completely different places. And I believe we should be extremely suspicious of the second one. So what should we do when someone wrongs us? First, stop. Don't respond while you're furious. Second, ask whether you want justice or whether you simply want pain transferred. Third, ask whether your response is proportional. And finally, ask the most difficult question of all, will this make my life better? Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not revenge. It's becoming indifferent. It's refusing to let somebody else's cruelty determine who you become. It's rebuilding your life. It's succeeding without needing them to fail. And sometimes it's forgiveness, not for them, for you. So, an eye for an eye sounds fair until everyone is blind. And perhaps that's the lesson we should take from both ancient traditions. Justice matters. Boundaries matter. Accountability matters. But revenge is a different thing. Revenge doesn't repair what happened. It doesn't give us back the time we've lost. It doesn't erase the insult. And it rarely makes us feel better for as long as we imagine it will. The person who hurt you may deserve consequences, but they don't necessarily deserve your peace. So perhaps turning the other cheek isn't about being weak. Perhaps it's about refusing to allow another person's bad behavior to dictate your own. Sometimes you don't win by hurting the person who hurt you. Sometimes you win by walking away and discovering that eventually you don't care anymore. If you found this video thought-provoking, please like, subscribe and share it with someone who enjoys examining the ideas that shape our behavior. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. When someone wrongs you, where do you draw the line between justice and revenge? Until next time, choose your battles carefully.